I always thought it a little bit curious, at least. Of course, the astronauts aboard the International Space Station, some are Americans, some are Japanese, Europeans, all over. But on average, about 2 or sometimes 3 have their ham radio license. It's just not required, but just for whatever reason, astronauts tend to have their ham radio license. There's a full-blown ham radio station aboard the ISS, and in addition to repeaters. So,
I wonder who decided, like, hey, we're just gonna put this stuff up there, because that costs money. Like, it's fuel and space and all that.
well,
It's
and
probably the original, that's what it is.
yeah. Well, it could be, because especially when they started to do this, ham radio was maybe even more popular than it is today. I'm not sure that's a fair statement, but part of the problem is you just can't take and I think it's Kenwood equipment is what they've got on the International Space Station, but it took them 2 years to develop space-ready ham radio equipment. So even though they had the basis electronics, you've got to make it suitable for space, for redundancy, and not be a fire hazard, and be mechanically safe. And it's just, as you suggest, a very expensive undertaking. And then the antennas on the outside, a whole other deal to survive the space atmosphere. They're not atmosphere, but the lack of atmosphere. That's right. Part 97 of FCC, that's what really governs the ham radio piece. A space station is defined as an amateur station more than 50 kilometers above the Earth's surface. So again, just rote memory could be on the exam. LEO satellite, low Earth orbit is typically the ham satellites that we use. It looks kind of big there, but some of them are just cube size. They're very, very small because typically they have a 5-watt radio in them, so not any more powerful than what our little radios are. A lot of it's just batteries, insulation, solar cells to regenerate the batteries. It's a repeater. So as we'll see, they typically run both a UHF and a VHF radio. It's a duplex in that I'm transmitting and receiving at the same time. Well, anytime you're transmitting and receiving, like that, it's really hard not to overload the receiving antenna when your transmitter's like that. So on repeater bands, we have a small spacing, but it's on the same band. What's the spacing on 2 meter, 600 kilohertz? Yeah, 600 kilohertz. So less than a meg. So the spacing's not very large. But that means the same issue because we're essentially transmitting and receiving at the same time because we're repeating what's being said. Well, on the space station, we use 2 different bands. We use 70 centimeter and 2 meters, UHF and VHF, again, because those antennas are so close, it's a way to space that out. But it does complicate things because you then need a radio that can do VHF and UHF. I'll talk about that here in just a second. So I think LEO is the takeaway from this one, and then the 50-mile height there. There we go. So I have an app on my phone that you can select. There's a number of different ham satellites that you can use. Again, they're repeaters. China has some that you can use. US, of course, has some. And they're just there to use. One of the problems is they don't stay overhead very long. So you've got an app that calculates when that satellite will be overhead. It'll also list the frequencies, both UHF and VHF. There's not exactly a standard. Sometimes going up is UHF and sometimes it's VHF, so you just have to look at the satellite to see, but you need the frequency anyway to be able to do that. There is something called a Doppler shift. The classic example is a train racing by with its horn blowing. You may have seen that, and the horn actually changes pitch as it goes, part of the Doppler effect. Well, radio waves have the same sort of thing. So in reality, what will happen is as the signal comes down and the satellite's moving because at the high speed, the frequency actually changes. So even though you set your radio at the frequency, the Doppler shift causes the actual, and it'll go on both sides of the published frequency. So if it's 146.2, it'll go on either side of that. So it starts high and goes low. And so what I've done is rather than do a VFO, which manually changes the frequency, I'll set 2 channels above the target frequency and 2 channels below with just the right amount of spread. So as it moves, I can just click it and follow that satellite as it goes up or down. So that's why on the Yagi that Adam showed you just a little bit ago, there's 2 lengths of antennas, is because one's VHF and one's UHF. And again, just to separate them a little bit, I do them at 90 degrees. But the satellite, of course, is turning in space, so you've got the polarity of the antenna changing. So sometimes you have to do a vertical, sometimes you have to do a horizontal, and you track it as it goes across the sky because it's moving pretty good. So you want something kind of lightweight. So that's what this is. A little bit, but you can be off quite a bit. So I've done it on a golf course. We've got, the clearer your landscape is, the better, because even satellite signals don't go through trees very well. So if you're on the beach, that's perfect because you've got just such a wide horizon. I actually have a cable for each, and I like to use 2 radios, one set to VHF and one UHF. And the reason for that is that way I can hear myself talking on the other radio. So if I'm transmitting on VHF, I can then listen to myself on UHF to know that I'm getting to the satellite. Because the challenge always is the satellite hearing me without a lot of feedback? And you may only have a 7 or 8 minute window where all this transpires, so you've got to do it all pretty quickly. So I've got a diplexer.
You're sharing them 7 or 8 minutes with 500 other hams that are in here.
That's right, yeah.
Like,
So,
especially when they turn the repeater on that's on the space station.
Yeah.
The first 6 months. Good luck.
yeah.
If you didn't have $1,000 wrapped up into your satellite station, you weren't getting it.
Yeah. So we're just running out of time here. So satellite tracking programs, Keplerian is sort of the takeaway on this slide here. It's just the mathematical system used to calculate where that satellite's going to be. And it'll give you the azimuth, which is the north, south, east, west direction this way, and the elevation. The elevation is the degrees in the sky it is. So you think 360 degrees, horizon's at 0, so up is 90 degrees. So if you get a satellite at 80, 85 degrees elevation, that's great. It means it's high in the sky. If you're down at 20, it's right along the tree line. It's just going kind of low, and those are sometimes hard to hit. And they're not there very long because they're so near the horizon. That's right. If you can find one, and it varies, you'll just have to check the app to see where you're at on that. So that antenna looks kind of familiar there. Okay. Let's see here. Transmission mode, single sideband FM. I've not ever done single sideband, but it can be done. FM is what we typically use with the handheld radios. 5 watts does it. You reach all the satellites with 5 watts. Technicians are available to do that, so no problem there. Dual band directional antenna, that's what we looked at there. And this is just suggesting that you do UHF and VHF, uplink and downlink, and the app will tell you, what the frequencies are and which is which there. Any amateur is allowed to transmit on the uplink frequency and would be therefore the control operator. I think we talked about the control operator in the first one. You can use the International Space Station. They talk about this a lot. You can talk to astronauts. Well, theoretically you could, but I'll promise you the astronauts aren't standing on their hand radios too much trying to talk to people because there's just so much demand. So it's next to impossible. What they typically do is do it for classes. And they'll get a whole school together and set up a time pre-arranged with the astronauts to be able to talk to the whole class and have the class asking that. But it's on ham radio. Usually ham operators help set that up and so forth. Telemetry is just data from the space station. Could be temperature, position, all sorts of things. So that is on the exam. Of course, anyone can essentially receive about anything, so that's not big news there. And a transmission from a satellite that contains status information is called the beacon. And there's other actually ham beacons around the world that we sometimes use, but we call that on the space station a beacon as well. So a good way to determine whether your uplink power is too low or too high is that your signal strength on the downlink should be about the same as the beacon. Well, that really requires that you have two radios because I need to be able to transmit and listen at the same time. If you're using 5 watts, you're going to be fine, so you don't need to worry about too much, but it is on the exam. Impact of using excessive effective radiating power is that the satellite will regulate its output based on the strength of the receiving signal. So if it receives a really strong signal, so someone could be pumping 50 watts from a base station in their home, so you don't need to be out in the field to be able to do that. There's hams that have automatic tracking antennas on their outside, and they may be putting 50 or 100 watts. Well, that'll overload the system. It'll reduce the power because the satellite thinks it's really strong, and then no one else can hear it. So that's what it's talking about there. So this is the Doppler shift, but the noise didn't change, so I'm not quite sure what the airplane was. I guess it was supposed to, but it should change in pitch is what the Doppler effect is. In our case, the actual frequency changes and requires that we tweak it just a little bit. You don't need to, but I found it really helps if you move it just a kilohertz or two. So the Doppler shift spin fading is just, again, the idea that the satellite's rotating and we have that polarized effect, vertical versus horizontal, and we talked about vertical antennas for mobile because of the vertical polarization. So that's what that's all about. And we have 30 seconds left. I'm going to play you just a part of this, if you can hear it. It's coming, not sure why it's not coming through the TV speakers. But he's making a contact with the satellite, which I thought was kind of interesting, but we're going to dump out of it here.
Amateur radio satellites are typically placed in polar orbits. As the Earth spins under the orbit of the satellite's earthly coverage changes. Over time, the satellite covers every point on the globe. The satellite is a repeater in orbit. You can use a directional satellite antenna to contact other hams by sending your signal through the satellite repeater. Simply connect the satellite antenna to your favorite HD and then program a satellite channel. Typically, the channel will monitor one ham band, such as the 2-meter band, and it will shift to another band entirely when you push to talk, such as the 70-centimeter band. Use an online satellite tracking service to find an amateur satellite pass near you. I like the Heavens Above web service. It's free, and I like the format of their satellite data presentation. Select the satellite of interest to see future passes near your location. Select a specific pass to obtain a sky path or ground path map, complete with time tick marks in your local time zone format. Use this information to estimate the path across the sky if the satellite pass. I print out the ground track map and pin it to a music stand that I use as a desk during the pass. Then I estimate the path across the sky based on the elevation of the satellite during its pass. In this case, about 65 degrees above the western horizon, or roughly 2/3 of the way up to vertical. I imagine the path through the trees and local structures to help me later in pointing the antenna accurately. I also practice the path with the antenna. Perfect pointing isn't critical, but you want to be in the ballpark. I use my cell phone clock to display time throughout the pass, and I have a writing pad handy to try and record all the call signs and the Maidenhead grid square locators that are the typical operator information exchange. When the satellite is scheduled to pop up above the horizon, I begin monitoring. The signal gets stronger and clearer as the satellite passes over, and my persistence pays off. Finally, I make a successful contact, and more follow during the last couple of minutes of the 7-minute pass.
Delta 979.
Sierra Tango Uniform to from Whiskey Delta 9, Echo Whiskey Kilo, DM43 to a south.
Copy your DM43, copy my DM79. Thank you.
73 WD 9036.
And the DM43 was his Maidenhead grid square number, so